I'll go ahead and start the session. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this important session. My name is Rispa Arose, and I serve as the Africa Regional Capacity Building Coordinator for the Local Access Network, LockNet Initiative, which is a collective effort led by the Association for Progressive Communication, APC, and Rhizomatica in partnership with grassroots communities and support organizations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean. We aim to directly support meaningful community-centered connectivity initiatives while contributing to an enabling ecosystem for their emergence and their growth. It has been an enriching and insightful week participating here at the Internet Governance Forum 2024 here in Riyadh. And today I have the privilege of moderating our discussion on a topic that lies at the heart of digital inclusion. The topic is innovative financing mechanisms to bridging the digital divide. In this digital age, ensuring universal access to telecommunication infrastructure remains a significant challenge, particularly in developing countries. Despite significant public and private investments, traditional approaches to telecommunication infrastructure, while impactful in certain respects, have failed to achieve universal access goals, even for basic voice connectivity for over two decades. However, as the saying goes, necessity is the mother of all invention. And across the globe, community-centered connectivity solutions have emerged as a powerful alternative. These solutions are rewriting the narrative, driven by distinct investment priorities. These providers not only connect underserved communities, but they also foster social, economic development. They represent a vital part of the micro, small and medium and enterprises, MSMEs ecosystem, which is the backbone of developing countries, that has been largely overlooked by traditional large-scale network operators. They remind us that connectivity is more than a utility. It is a foundation for empowerment and progress. And with all this said, they still face funding constraints and regulatory challenges that hinder their sustainability and scalability and their impact. Efforts to engage traditional commercial financial institutions that fund communication infrastructure have surfaced three intrinsic difficulties that needs to be addressed. Their limited scale, their high real and perceived level of risks, and their lower returns on investment. And to address these constraints, there is a strong need to create an enabling and flexible policy, regulatory and financing environment that encourages the emergence of more innovative regional and local investment models for community-centered connectivity providers, which by extension allows them to expand and operate cost-effectively. And in this respect, to improve the balance between profit maximization and also reaching the universal access. The time has come to fully review where investments are made and how effective they are at addressing digital inclusion. That is just a brief, and for our session today, we will explore the interplay of policy, regulation, and financing in fostering innovative connectivity solutions that bridge the digital divide. Our discussion will showcase new and innovative financing mechanisms, investing in small-scale infrastructures that are already supporting emerging and successfully supporting community-centered solutions. I am thrilled to have a distinguished panel of experts and practitioners with us today. And without further ado, I will give them each less than a minute to introduce themselves. And I'll start with those joining us online. I'll give the floor to Dr. Emma Otieno.
Okay. Thank you very much, Whisper, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. In the event that I'm not able to keep both the voice and the video, sometimes I'll be switching off, but glad to join this very, very important session. My name is Dr. Emma Otieno, currently based in Kenya. I'm on this call representing an organization, a nonprofit organization known as Women International Digital Inclusivity Network. It has an abbreviation RIFN that is written in French. Back in Kenya, I also work for the regulator. That's the Communication Authority of Kenya. My background mostly at the moment, I'm specializing on matters digital inclusivity, and specifically, I'm passionate about digital gender inclusivity. I'm happy to be on this call. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Emma. We are also very happy to have you as part of the panelists. Next on, I'll go to Dr. Carlos Rey Moreno. Carlos?
Hi, Risper. Hi, everyone there in the room and also online. My name is Carlos Rey Moreno. I've been co-managing the initiative the LogNet initiative that Risper mentioned at the beginning, focusing on policy and regulatory or creating an enabling environment for uh, community-centered connectivity initiatives, especially in policy and regulation. But lately, I've been doing quite some work around financial mechanisms as part of that. And it will be a pleasure to be in the session sharing that with you. I'm joining from Spain. It has been amazing to be there with you, but it was impossible this time around. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carlos. Next on, we'll hear from Jane Coffin.
Yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Jane. I'm joining you from the United States, and I'm speaking in my personal capacity, not professional where I work, and based on my experience over the last 28 years. And most recently, my experience working with communities around the world, international financial institutions, international organizations focused on connectivity, and the importance of how we can take a look at financing smaller community-based networks and or small ISPs. A pleasure to join you today. And again, I'm speaking my personal capacity, and none of the information that I'll be speaking about today is non-public. It's all public information and based on my experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jane, and thanks for clarifying that. Now on, I will also, I don't know if our online moderator is in the room, Harira. Okay. Then in that case, for our online participant, please feel free to introduce yourselves and where you're joining from on the chat. And now I'll come back to on-site and the speakers, the lovely speakers that we have. Now I'll give this chance to Talent to start us off. You can introduce yourself.
Thanks so much. My name is Talant, and I'm wearing two hats here. One is the co-founder of Internet Society Kyrgyz chapter, within which we've launched several community networks in Kyrgyzstan. And also I am representing Global Digital Inclusion Partnership, which is a member of a consortium with CARE International and GSMA, and implementing project called Women in Digital Economy Fund. So I'll talk about that as well. Thank you.
Much Talent. Happy to have you in this panel. Last but not least, we'll hear from Lilian Chamorro.
Well, hello to all. Thanks for joining to this session. My name is Lilian Chamorro. I'm part of the team of Colnodo. Colnodo is an NGO based in Colombia, in South America. We have been working with community networks since many years ago, but more helping communities to have their own infrastructure since 2017 approximately. And we have been involved in different projects with different parents and allies. Then, okay, I'm going to share with you some of the experience that we have in Colombia right now.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Looking forward to those experiences and engaging. Maybe just a brief on the structure of our session today. We will have a keynote presentation to set the stage, and this will then be followed by a dynamic panel discussions from the speakers we've heard from, and then afterwards we'll open the floor to questions and contributions, and I encourage each of you to engage your questions, thoughts, and insights, experiences will really help to make this session interactive and also enriching. So as we begin, I'd like to leave all of us with a question, maybe to think about and to reflect on, and that's in how can we reimagine financing models, and also financing models that can empower our local connectivity providers and achieve universal access. And with that said, I'd now welcome Dr. Carlos Rey Moreno to give us a keynote presentation. Carlos, over to you.
Hello. Thank you, Risper, and thank you. So it's a pleasure to be with so many nice people in this panel. Let me actually share screen. Yeah, okay. Let me know if you can see my screen. Those
I can
online.
see it, Carlos. Yep.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I wanted to go back to the introductory remarks from Risper and why we are talking about this, right? And it's the reality that, well, I also want to frame this presentation in the context of the WSIS Plus 20 review that is taking place at the moment and to be concluded next year. That there is a reality, right? That is the continued inability to meet universal service aspirations that demonstrate that for ensuring the WSIS vision of a people-centered, inclusive, and development-oriented information society, where everyone can create, access, and utilize and share information, we cannot leave it solely to traditional telecom incumbents operators to solve, right? That other actors need to participate, because as Risper was saying, after 20 years, there is a massive persistent digital divide that those business models are not able to close, right? Because over this time, we've seen a shift in focus from access to telephony to broadband internet, now to meaningful connectivity, that underscores that changing landscape. But throughout that changing landscape, there's the absence of a business case that meets the profitability requirements of those operators continue to pose a challenge for these players to offer services that can bridge the digital divide in remote and rural areas with small populations and low income. And despite being here today, despite many fora, especially after COVID, discussing this issue, discussing the issue of the persistent digital divide, and this has been a long-standing challenge. I mean, this was introduced in the Maitland report in 1985. It was known that that private sector alone was not going to be able to close the digital divide, right? Still, in that context, donors and many international financial institutions, because it was thought that a fully for-profit model was going to be able to do that, and that private investment were going to find enough return as to be able to finance this capital-intensive industry. They started to withdraw from the area in the early 90s, right? Because that private capital stepped in, right? So, but later on, as part of WSIS, there was a task force on financial mechanisms that was created to precisely look at what could be done, right? As it was realized that private capital could not do it alone. There were ideas of the Digital Solidarity Fund that were studied. The Digital Solidarity Fund was created, maybe not as intended initially, but more with voluntary contributions which did not quite solve the problem. But one of the things that the task force on financial mechanisms highlighted back in 2004, 2005 was the vital role of public finance as well, right? Because, from this graph from the World Bank from 2002 that we have seen in so many places, there is, an affordability frontier, a market gap, and then an access gap that the market is not going to be able to cover, and public intervention is going to be necessary, right? This actually led to the creation of many universal, or that report, and the TFF, the Task Force on Financial Mechanisms, influenced many discussions for countries to create universal service funds and implementing agencies to actually utilize them and implement them. Some countries, such as the US, promulgated USF even before this type of reports, but ever since this report, many other agencies or funds have been created. A report from the ITU mentioned that in 2022, 42% of their members had an USF agency or fund. And the adoption of the strategies, how it has worked, whether efficiently or inefficiently, is up for debate. In some countries, it has a massive positive impact. In other countries, there has been issues with its disbursement. It has been issues with many other things. I believe other speakers and during the discussions, we will be touching precisely on USFs, but they were there to solve or to look at that problem from that perspective, that the private finance was not going to be able to close the digital divide, right? But there were other findings from the TFFM that were incorporated in the Tunis agenda that I wanted to highlight here. One was helping to accelerate the development of domestic financial instruments, including by supporting networking initiatives based on local communities, and strengthening capacities to enhance the potential of securitized funds and utilizing them effectively, right? The Tunis agenda was adopted in 2005. This is the Pact for the Future that was adopted in September 2024, that is 3 months ago, where the digital divide is recognized as its first objective, right? That there is a persistent digital divide that is there, and that it needs to, accelerate it. The closing that digital divide needs to be accelerated in order to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And there are two commitments there that I want to kind of guide the presentation today. One is the development of innovative and blended financial mechanisms and incentives, included in collaboration with governments, multilateral development banks, and relevant international organizations and the private sector. Again, kind of saying that private and public and multilateral development banks are part of the solutions, and blended financing is part of the solution, but also that there is a need to invest on local network initiatives, right? It was said in 2005, it is said again in 2024, right? 20 years after. In order to provide safe and secure network coverage to all areas, including rural, remote, and hard-to-reach areas, right? So why no change? Why we are still discussing this 20 years later, right? I think from our analysis, and this is touching on the submission that APC did to the Commission on Science and Technology for Development on the WSIS Plus 20 review, that there has been little resources that has gone to developing countries. The WSIS didn't include a financial mechanism per se, a fund, mainly as a result of donor countries not wanting to make additional financial commitments, but also the fact that the lingering impact of structural adjustments, right? A trend in development aid to discourage global South governments relying on aid from investing on public sector infrastructure and services, and the debt burden after a period of debt forgiveness in the early of the centuries. That is, that current crisis of the debt is at the center of many of the issues that we are seeing in developing countries as well. And the idea that, financial mechanisms are not just to address the infrastructure issues, but also there is a need to include, there is a need to invest on human capacity and digital public services to do this, right? There is not going to be the infrastructure without the capacity. It would not solve this issue. But also because regardless of private finance and public finance, regarding of the USF, regarding of many other instruments, the logics have been supporting and using all that finance to support traditional incumbent operators, and they're trying to support the return on investments and their for-profit business model to do something that they are struggling to. That their business model is not able to provide the return on investment that they are seeking in those areas, right? And that again, something different needs to be done. A lot of the USF, pretty much 99% of that USF, has gone to the very same operators that were using private finance for their operation. But also that the public finance over and beyond USF, the multilateral banks only use 1%, and this is a study from the Alliance for Affordable Internet, that around 1% of the multilateral development banks' cumulative commitments in low and middle-income countries over the period of 2012 to 2026 in relation to ICTs was 1%, was 5 billion over that period, right? There has been some changes. There are some initiatives, such as, the World Bank, including ICTs and as part of the digital, as part of the priorities, the European Commission or Team Europe Global Gateway, the G7-led Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, the Digital Silk Road. There are many, many more investments, but still, those investments are going to the very same partners, and they are way less than what the ITU and others are considering to do that. And they are going to the very same places and investment and funding similar things in many cases than the private sector and private finance is funding, right? 5G, LEO satellites, submarine cables, that tend to focus on profitable markets that maximize the return of the shareholders. They are not going into supporting initiatives or supporting interventions that could potentially close the digital divide and address the issues that 30% of the persistent digital divide are facing. As Risper was saying, and I think as APC, ISO, many others have been saying over the years, there are existing initiatives that are showing that there are other ways of doing this, right? And initiatives that are based on, or business cases that are focused on decentralized, local, and community-centered initiatives that are driven by completely different investment imperatives, right? Where it's not only that they need to be self-sustainable, they need to have some revenue streams to be sustainable, but that they have a different bottom line around social and environmental concerns that move their interest, not only the sake of profit and return for their investors, right? They are part of the micro, small, and medium-sized businesses that are, as Risper was alluding to, part of the blood, or the lifeblood of so many economies on the global south, but that they don't, it's only very recently that they are taking part of the telecommunications sector, and that they are struggling to be part of a telecommunications sector that is built for traditional and national-based footprint, right? These community-centered connectivity providers can operate and be self-sustainable at a very small scale and have a way more diverse range of ownership and operating models, right? By being community-centered instead of profit-centered, as I was saying, they are able to use other financial mechanisms to reduce their costs and be centered on the communication needs of the communities rather than on the profit that their shareholders are seeking. Over and beyond the initiatives, we've seen that the ITU and all their members have reached consensus that both at the World Telecommunications Development Conference in the Bridging the Digital Divide resolution, that this type of complementary access solutions are needed, right? Not only at the WTDC, but also at the Plenipotentiary Conference. Again, all the member states agreeing that, there needs to be we need to look at complementary access solutions and enable them to close the digital divide. And the ITU, in the recent Universal Service Financing Efficiency Toolkit, is putting community broadband networks as part of the solutions that need to be considered, right? And because when we are looking at innovative financial mechanisms, those that are able to do the same at a lower cost are a financial mechanism in and by themselves, right? ABC is coming up with a financial assessment tool to compare last mile connectivity providers. And the initial findings that we are having is that they are considerably cheaper. And not only considerably cheaper, but that they bring along social inclusion related impacts to achieve meaningful connectivity that those incumbent traditional operators are not able to come up with. So how they are able to do this, right? Well, the investment comes from the users themselves, and they are also able to tap into other non-returnable support, such as subsidies and grants or donations from people that kind of align with that social mission. Also public budgets and other mechanisms that private companies also use, such as recovering the cost of hardware in the price of sales or private finance. But in the sustainability model, they also include other elements such as barter transactions, action-based subsidies, membership fees, and others that private operators are not able to meet. No? And that's how they are able to provide pricing that is below market price. Sometimes it's based on cost recovery, and sometimes it is even free of charge, depending on these other contributions on the capital investment and the sustainability models that members and other socially aligned actors are allowing them to achieve. So it's not only that there are recommendations and that are being incorporated in policy in some countries. It's not only that are existing initiatives that are able to do this at a lower cost. Is that financial institutions themselves, such as the Inter-American Development Bank and the Asian Development Bank, in their publications are incorporating and are recommending governments to look at this as a financial mechanism in and by itself, right? As a way of closing the digital divide, because traditional operators are not able to do so. The Broadband Commission, in this report from 2021, looking at financing models for bridging broadband gaps, incorporates recommendations that recommends government to explore the options and feasibility of funding allocations to empower smaller providers, such as community networks, recommends the potential beneficiaries from USF to include community networks, propose an international fund where projects that are less scalable, such as community networks, could be funded, and that could act as a clearinghouse for knowledge and best practices, and potentially provide loans and other resources at concessional terms. We have countries such as Argentina that are looking at supporting community networks, right? $3 million from the USF budget from 2020 to 2022 were made available to community networks. And one would say, but no, we cannot support community networks because, bigger operators are doing a great job at that, 100%. That's why we are referring to complementary solutions. That's why Argentina allocated 0.63% of their budget to community networks, so they could continue supporting the other operations that they were doing with 99.37% of their budget, right? It's not that is taking, it's not that what we are proposing and what others are proposing should be right front and center of these initiatives. It's about complementing, it's about testing things that haven't been tested, supporting initiatives that haven't been supported. So just coming to the proposed solutions, and I'm coming to an end. One is about capacity building, right? And again, I'm trying to talk to the WISIs, to talk to the task force on financial mechanisms, because some of the findings are the same, right? We proposed a new policy or financial mechanisms that could provide an information service that provide access to independent advice on how to evaluate the information that many governments and regulators are bombarded with from the private sector, and prevent them from looking at other solutions, that prevent them to negotiate as equals, right? Such information is also relevant, and such advice is also relevant to other stakeholder groups as well, to such as community-based initiatives and other of their partners. Because, as the Task Force on Financial Mechanism was saying, building human resource capacity and knowledge at every level is central for achieving the WISIS objectives. Diversifying the ecosystem. There is, we have some countries, such as Kenya, where there is a national recognition and even a license for community-centered initiatives, but that's the exception more so than the rule. So that recognition that is on the ITU, that recognition that comes from the multilateral development banks and other institutions need to be included, right? And streamlined, right? So there are licensing processes that reduce the licensing fees and make other enablers such as the spectrum and reporting burdens and access to backhaul available, right? If it's illegal to do this, how someone is going to invest on them, right? And there are many investors that are ready and willing to invest on this if they were legal, right? So please consider that as an enabled financial mechanism or as a prerequisite for this. And this needs to be accompanied by awareness raising and capacity building programs to develop the pipeline of initiatives that could use effectively these instruments that are created, right? And this touch again with a finding from the Task Force on Financial Mechanisms on WISIS that was saying that policy and regulatory incentives and more open access policies are also needed for private investment, civil society organizations, and community networks to contribute to expanding ICT to rural and low-income populations to address the bottom of the pyramid population. That is to say, this was said in 2004. The other recommendations that I'm making were said in 2004. If we don't include them in 2005 and in 2024, 2025, we are not going to be able to implement the GDC. We are not going to be able to invest in local networks in a way that they close the digital divide, right? And two more points on innovative financing mechanisms. For that investment in local network initiatives to be effective, new ways to make smaller products available are needed. Multilateral development banks, they recommend supporting this, but they don't know how to do it because the minimum investment that they can do is $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. These small operators, there is no need for $1 million. They could function with way less, right? But we understand that making those deals available has the same transactional costs. So we need to look at reducing those transactional costs per loan, per grant, per whatever that we are doing, as well as finding ways of de-risking those investments so the rates are lower, right? They are donors up there that have guarantee pools that are willing to use this, to de-risk this and reduce the interest rates. There are ways of working with local financial institutions and that are public and that could, benefit from those concessional loans and pass them on in these products so they could be made smaller and with better rates for these social mission-driven operators. We could create pools of projects and a standardized process and documentation that reduce the duplication of effort to, again, reduce the transactional costs. And this is not new. This has been tested in so many other sectors that, could take the form of that international fund as proposed by the UN Broadband Commission. The GDC is talking about blended finance, and that blended finance, those grants could be used in places where it is impossible to find a return on investment or to start initiatives off. And it could be used to cover some of the transactional costs that I was alluding above. But there is an interest on development finance, right? There is the UN Financing for Development Conference that is taking place next year, after 10 years, that could look into all of this, that could, put operators that are looking at development, not at profit, at the center of this initiative, of this investment in telecommunications. But there is a risk of, and we are seeing this already, of those profit-seeking companies looking at development finance that we need to be aware of and kind of be attentive. So the development finance is used for development, is not used for profit, right? And for increasing shareholder value. But this is the last comment that also was mentioned by Risper, right? We need to improve the balance between profit maximization and the goal of reaching universal and meaningful access, right? And the time has come of reviewing where those investments are going, right? And how effective they are when they are targeting universal and meaningful connectivity. And we really invite the stakeholders to implement the solutions that we propose in this presentation. We are open to discuss, to share our lessons, to work together to do that, but really development should be put at the center and not profit maximization. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for for setting the tone for this discussion. Your brilliant presentation has given us why this discussion now, and why it's important to start thinking around innovating financing mechanism for bridging the digital divide. You've mentioned a lot of the work that has already been happening, both in terms of the global processes as well as policy recommendations, and also tools that have been created along the way. And now with your presentation also have brought out brilliant proposed solutions that different stakeholders can look into in realizing in bridging the digital divide. And of course, community-centered connectivity stand as a viable alternative solutions that should get more focus and also visibility around supporting in bridging the digital divide. This really sets the tone towards our next segment of this particular session. Now we'll move into the panel discussion, and we'll hear from our different speakers that are lined up. We'll start with Lilian and Talent, who are here with me. And for this segment, we'll look at framing the challenge and ideally talk about what are the main barriers to universal access and why have traditional infrastructure approach failed. Looking into your various experience and also your expertise within your the work that you've done. And also, while at it, perhaps you can talk around why are community-centered connectivity solutions uniquely suited to address this gap. So we can start with you, Lilian.
Well, thank you, Risper and Carlos, for the exposition. Yes, something that we have been talking about is that for the private sector is the rural communities are not something that they want to address, because those are communities with low income that they cannot pay high prices for the services, for the communication services. But also they are few people in those remote areas, then the investments that companies make in those spaces is difficult that they have the return to obtain the money that they invest in those spaces, because we have few people. And also the cost of the deployment of the infrastructure in some of the rural areas is so high. This is because you need transportation, you need security also. Sometimes, for example, basic services as electricity are not available, then they have to implement also other infrastructure, not only telecommunication infrastructure. Then the cost to deploy telecommunications infrastructure in rural areas is so high, and the low income and the few population in those areas is not enough to cover the cost. And this is if we don't have in account other factors, for example, the difficult to access to some territories. In Colombia, we shamefully have areas where the violence, but also the geographic is very hard to go to those areas. Then it's something that is not easy to address, even for implement infrastructure, but also for sustain infrastructure. When you need to repair something or something like that, it's not so easy to go to that areas. By other side, the governmental programs have failed also in sustain the initiatives. Then they invest a lot of money, putting antennas, putting some infrastructure, but when resources finish, then the projects also finish. And we have a lot of, I don't know how to say, like, infrastructure that is not used and is getting old and without use in many rural areas. You can see antennas, you can see a lot of infrastructure that is not used in rural areas because the program of the government's finished and no one could sustain the work of that kind of equipment. About the other question, why community-centered connectivity solutions are suited for this. I think one of the principal things is the flexibility of these kind of initiatives. Flexibility to adapt to the diverse and unique conditions that every community have. Then it's so difficult that you see community networks that works equal in many of the communities. Each community network is different, have their own characteristics, because the communities can establish their own infrastructure adapting to the geographic conditions, but also to the necessities they have, and because also because the sustainability model that they adopt is different, and it depends of the context, the income that the community have, also the traditional ways to exchange I don't know how to say in English, but yes, to exchange the services could be. And additionally, the communities can establish their own governance process to define how and for why the community network is for. And other reason is not all the reasons, but just one more. The possibility to share basic costs, for example, the connectivity, for example, the transportation of some technical people to came to help to fix some problem, or the community can share the cost, can have different ways to abort. For example, they invite to the people to their house. It's not just about money. It's also about how the community organize themselves to have the services that they need for sustain the community network.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak about the community networks, and I wanted to share a story of how a small investment into a community network helped unlock major investments into infrastructure. So just before coming to IGF, I was reading news in Kyrgyzstan, and there was a news that a very remote village of Zardaly in Kyrgyzstan was connected to electricity. And the Minister of Energy personally came to the village and announced that now the village has electricity. Just a few weeks before that, Minister of Transport came to this village and said that I'm going to provide you a road, because this village had no road, no electricity, no internet. And before that, a mobile operator came and installed a mobile tower. All of this is happening like months after months in a village which previously nobody has heard of. And if you heard of it, would be once in a decade for a very, maybe there's some disaster happened or something. And the president himself flew to the village on a helicopter to say that we are going to help the village with infrastructure. Why all of this was that a year before that, the village was connected to the internet as a community network with a small grant from Internet Society Foundation. And the very first thing that the villagers did was, of course, first to connect to their relatives around the world, saying that now we have a connectivity, please call us, we can call you. And the second, they started making videos of the village saying that Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, we don't have a road, we don't have electricity, we don't have mobile connectivity, please help. And maybe like Carlos was saying, that it wasn't millions of dollars that were required to connect this village. It took maybe $10,000 to provide internet. But with this small investment, the villagers were able to attract hundreds of thousands of dollars from the government to do all of this infrastructure. So we were really excited that we as the Internet Society Kyrgyz chapter helped the village to be connected. And this was an interesting kind of case of a which is not PPP, as we know, but I counted 6P. So it was a partnership of the public, the government, partnership with the private sector, the ISPs who provided the spectrum, partnership with the provincial or municipal government, partnership with the people who live in the village, and finally a partnership of civil society organizations and international donors like ISOC Foundation, European Union, US Embassy. They have provided small funds that allowed us to connect this village to the internet. And the way we learned how to do community networks was actually in IGF like this many years ago in Guadalajara. And that's where we learned that there is such a movement of community networks. And I think today there is a discussion that next year there will be a decision, do we need the IGFs? And of course, for the villagers of Zardaly, yes, we need the IGFs because they do make a real impact on the people on the ground. So this is a kind of my brief introduction. Hopefully later on I can share information about potential financing opportunities for such initiatives to close the digital divide, especially gender digital divide. And I wanted to talk about the Women in Digital Economy Fund. And I think we have colleagues online who are working with women-led initiatives. And this fund can provide support in terms of financing, in terms of technical assistance and know-how, and in terms of policy and regulations. So thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Thailand. Such a great story, and just back to give what community connectivity can do in terms of even fundraising for this sort of initiatives. And also Lilian, thank you so much for highlighting from the community aspect and the governance of this type of networks, and how by pulling the resources together they can be able to sustain this network infrastructure and even reduce the cost of this type of community-centered connectivity. Now next on, I'll just jump into the next segment where we'll now hear regional insights on innovative policies and regulation. And with us in the room, we have Dr. Emma Otieno and also Jen Coffin. As I give you the floor, perhaps you can talk to us around what role do regulators play in enabling flexible, community-oriented licensing framework. as well as how can universal service fund mechanisms be more transparent, efficient, and inclusive to support smaller local connectivity providers. We can start with Jane and then finish with Dr. Emma.
Thank you very much. And it was just very inspiring hearing everyone speak. And it has struck me so much that when you start to think about the localized approach to providing connectivity, it's almost a very obvious corollary that you need a localized approach to policy regulation and financing. So if you're, and that means looking at, as Carlos has said, different ways of assessing risk, different ways of bringing blended finance, meaning different pots of money together at different times with different different funders and different instruments, financial instruments. It's just very logical that you would look at this differently now. And as Carlos has noted, the 1985 Maitland Commission report, known as the Missing Link Report, laid this all out for us years ago. And the regulatory and policy environment has changed so much over time and does probably need to be recalibrated to the local circumstances that we are all seeing. How do we find different ways of changing our policies and regulations to fit and adapt to making sure that different size networks, which have different demand and supply side economics than larger network investments, how do we take a look at this again? And I think, and Dr. Emma will probably have a great deal to say here too, is that we've got to take some risks as policymakers and regulators and rethink how we're looking at local connectivity infrastructure assessment, feasibility studies, what's out there in a country, and how we would reapproach, reimagine not only that policy and regulatory environment, because the investors want to see data. They want to see the facts. They want to know how many people are not connected. Where is that community located? What's the potential estimated cost of connecting that community, whether it's through satellite technology, fixed infrastructure, fixed wireless infrastructure, or wireless solutions alone. They want to see the facts, they want to understand, but we also need some of those larger investment organizations and some of the localized investment entities to re-look at the demand and supply side issues, what the regulatory and policy frameworks are that are in existence, and what needs to be changed from that regulatory policy side and the financial side to match that local connectivity challenge. One thing I would say is that regulators and policymakers have a fabulous tool in their hands in something called the notice of inquiry, or a gathering of information process. You can put out a notice and ask different organizations to provide you with information, and you can pull in all that information to reassess, realign, and reimagine what you need to do. Look, the G20 this year in the Digital Economy Working Group has even acknowledged that innovative financing is super important to connectivity. And that's from the Brazil process this year. It's rolling into South Africa next year, in 2025. So there's a recognition at the highest levels of government, at the highest levels of global organizations and financial organizations, that innovative approach to financing, the blended finance approach that Carlos indicated, needs to be looked at. And you have to have that policy and regulatory corollary that match. It's not just, oh, we'll bring in lots of money, but how do we bring in money at a certain point locally with a different vision of risk as well? There's an old way of looking at risk that's a bit, I'm going to say this out loud, and this is my personal opinion, colonial. It's a traditional, different type of banking approach. We've got to de-risk investment differently. And so it's at that local level with the local facts and with the data so that investors have confidence, but they're local investors too, which might be more locally bought into the solutions that could be provided. So really, if we're looking and reimagining on how we bring, and Talent has just talked about a network in Kyrgyzstan, that network is a completely different network economic and policy and regulatory solution based on what type of technologies can be brought in, how the local people can be brought in to also help with that connectivity solution. And so the investors are going to look at this differently. The government, from a governance perspective, is going to look at this differently as well. So it's matching that local sensibility, the local factors in place, and just taking steps back. And I'm going to circle back around. Sorry, it's a little late here, so my brain is probably a little circular. But please, as regulators and policymakers, give yourself a little breathing room to reimagine, to take a step back and work with the public, work with different financial institutions, work with ITU and the development financial institutions, but work with this multi-stakeholder community you also have of APC, ISOC, other, where you can come in and get that information from all of the organizations who know that local circumstance. And then, of course, some of those financiers and investors that know the different types of blended finance instruments that can be brought in. So we really are talking about taking a step back, gathering more data, looking at new models that are being brought in, and looking at just the sheer fact that if we haven't been able to solve some of the connectivity problems from since 1985 forward, we have seen how community networks can solve that problem. We've seen how regulators can come in and reimagine their USFs. We've seen how that they can reimagine their licensing and bring in community and other complementary based networks. You really can create a matchup with the financing side now, and with and looking at the different demand and supply side. I'm going to stop talking so Dr. Emma can jump in here, but I'm really excited to hear more from the panelists and others, but I think we really do have an amazing opportunity to just rethink, step back, and gather more data. And for regulators and policymakers, use that tool of the notice of inquiry to gather more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane and Carlos and the rest of the speakers who have really given a very pertinent points to this very important subject of discussion. And I will just augment the very many points that have already been stated very aptly. In terms of how the regulator can be this enabler for the community-oriented networks, and in terms of coming in as the enabler for licensing or the existence, I would actually state the following, and I'll be using the case of Kenya, just as Carlos has said, that Kenya has made a bit of progress, and very passionately and very intentionally. So when it comes to supporting the community-centered networks or connectivity. So one of the things and where Kenya started, and it should be a good example for all the other regulators to go, is to really take the issue of access gaps for the market when it comes to connectivity gaps and usage gaps very seriously. I think that's where Kenya started to create this appetite and create a justification of where to place the community-centered networks, and where actually how to fight for their place in the frameworks of the regulation and in policy. So for the case here in 2021, there was an updated access gap study that was being undertaken, and it went further to actually really take a microscopic view of the true gap, because by that time, the connection in terms of population coverage had already gotten up upwards of 78. So we're indeed getting into the true gap space of what Carlos shared as the access gap model. And with that, the beauty also that a space like Kenya enjoys is the combining of the regulator also being the body responsible for the Universal Service Fund. So this very seamlessly speak to each other, that when there is data, empirical data that the Universal Service Fund brings onto the table, the regulatory arm of the regulator really swings in, and they're able to come on board with issues like then how can we use these findings to update the market structure. And that is how the case of finding a place to review the market structure and starting to a process of incorporating the community-centered networks into the regulatory framework. And for Kenya, in 2020, the first the license framework was adopted, and since then, several community networks have been licensed. So that's another regulatory support that has actually been extended to enable this sorts of networks. And moving on, actually, the regulator should also move away from being the police to an enabler, and I like the question that has been asked, which is enabling. For instance, there's been a lot of deliberate handholding that has come from the Kenyan regulatory setup, that the regulator is reaching out and really nurturing the community networks and the constituents, speaking to institutions like APC, LockNet, and other capacity building facilitators, and trying to champion for, can we have courses, capacity building opportunities that are actually centered to supporting the community networks operators. And we're seeing that really their capacity is a bit low. Resource-wise, they're also a bit not very enabled. So when the regulator comes to the table and speaks and actually champions for their rights, actually, and speak for them in terms of, oh, let us allocate, let us prioritize, let's ensure we do not have a conversation where we're talking about the various market segments, the various support, the various challenges, without including the community-centered network. So that has really been an enabling role that the regulator has played in this perspective. And even this year, we've had several collaborative initiatives with the Africa Telecommunications, the capacity building arm of the telecom sector, and the LockNet and APC and the regulator, the ministry, to really ensure that the capacity of the constituents in this space is being built. So there's been practical example that actually that is an enabling angle to it. Further to that, there's the issue of making that space very clear. Beyond the existence of just the licensing framework, there need to be additional guidelines that can really provide sort of like things like handbooks, things like guidelines on how to really domesticate or roll out networks in different typologies. And I think some previous speakers have talked about the various challenges that are facing these connectivity initiatives. The challenges in some areas are terrain, the challenges in other areas are security related, others are just about affordability and financial support. So actually coming up with guidelines that incorporate the feedback from these operators, so that they're out there. So the people who are interested to come into fill in this gap are able to be guided uniformly in terms of how they can go about it, even in terms of accessing support. What is the procedure? Where do you start from? When it comes to this license, apart from the framework being there, how do you start? Whom do you talk to? Where do you go to for support? And we find that they're quite not exposed, because most of them are indeed from the community, they're from the rural. So they really need a lot of guidance, like really broken down to granular guidance to enable them. And that, again, speaking of the Kenyan situation, that is something that is ongoing, and the process of even augmenting the guidelines to support them is happening. And also the issue of sustainability. We find that being a subject that is very critical, that has to be at the center of this discussion all the time. And if a regulator is coming in from the front of being able to support the community networks, when you have licensed a community network, you don't want to license it to go and die. So what are these other discussions that can be put on the table from the policy perspective, from bringing on the board the other agencies as collaborators? For instance, the feedback we're getting from the community networks in Kenya is that the revenue agency, seeming to want to expand their revenue base, would actually go for anybody who seems to be putting up a business, trying to speak for them. They cannot be able to go as individuals to speak onto those tables, so that you are speaking for them and saying that this is a new a model which is working like this, which should be exempted, talking about exemptions in terms of taxations, clear exemptions that are actually enacted in the law, speaking to other players like the Ministry of Finance, the central banks, like what avenues can actually come on board to assist this community networks, especially that we are seeing that they'll have to get into the leveraging the usage gap, so that they come up with a bit of products that can create that sustainability interface between the connectivity and the keeping the business running. So that sustainability is a very major issue, and the regulator is trying also to champion through the various forums that can be able to listen to whatever is being proposed as avenues and strategies of enabling the sustainability of these community networks. I'll quickly speak to 2-3 points maybe that touch on the issues of how this transparent, efficient, inclusive ways of supporting this and using the Universal Service Fund. And we have to rethink as regulators, I think, and the Universal Service Funds mostly, what are these other approaches that can be used to finance the community-centered connectivity or networks. A key point here, speaking from, again, the experience in Africa, I find that most Universal Service Funds are using subsidies as a key support to the telecommunications bodies, operators. And we find that this, even in the Kenyan situation, a subsidy to a network, a community-centered network might not be it because it's not for profit, as unlike the other categories of licenses. So starting to move away from the traditional way of support to thinking wider about, even if it's a government that is managing the Universal Service Fund, grants, frameworks for grants, that requires a bit of change in the laws, like the public financial management laws. The issues of like loaning, and the other day we were having a conversation with Brazil, and they have a very good model where the Universal Service Fund is loaning these small operators, community-centered networks to loan. So that is a collaboration, a very major shift in law, bringing together the ICT ministry, the Ministry of Finance, and the banks, so that the Universal Service Fund can be used to offer loans. So many other models that, if time allowed, we'll actually speak about. And then also the issue of really getting the involvement, engaging the community-centered connectivity networks, the players in that space, so that you get feedback that can improve decisions that are being made. And then also strategies, like for instance, I've seen the current strategy that's being current under development for the Universal Service Fund in the space of Kenya. Community networks, community-centered connectivity has been prioritized, very clear targets, like by when, how many do they want to support, what frameworks should be put in place, what kind of stakeholder engagement and mapping should be undertaken. And then, of course, monitoring and evaluating how that is being implemented. Then finally, and the last one is really collaborating with the agencies or governments or other bodies, let's say like the APC and networks, the people who have the global perspective to champion for the community-centered connectivity, so that they can support in the areas of research, so that regulators can have updated data to inform decisions, both on the side of the Universal Service Fund and the side of the regulation, because they have the part of the pie that makes decisions that can impact on this, but they require updated data, and they may not have that resource or the expertise in all the instances to be able to make up decisions. So thank you very much. Let's see what other available opportunity can be to keep on discussing about this. There's so much about it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Brilliantly said. Thank you so much for our two presenters. And Dr. Emma for coming in as and talking as from the regulatory perspective. Jane, also thank you so much for joining in at this hour, and also just sharing and really underscoring the importance of regulators reimagining financing for initiatives like community-centered connectivity solutions, and gathering more data, as well as working with different stakeholders, really a multi-stakeholder approach to supporting the community-centered connectivity solutions. For Dr. Emma, thank you so much for also highlighting the best the case that has been happening in Kenya in terms of regulators hand-holding the community networks, and what that looks like in creating an enabling environment for community-centered connectivity solutions, and of course just highlighting the role of USF and as how that alternative models and frameworks that can really look into transparency of an inclusive universal service fund in supporting community-centered connectivities. I am just cognizant of time, and because of that, we'll jump into question and answers, and we'll have a discussion around that as we round up this very engaging conversation. So I'll start with the online audience. Harira, are there any questions? Harira, can you hear me? Are there any questions online?
Risper, she might be having some connectivity issues. She was
Okay.
here before, but she's no longer on
Okay.
the
Great.
on the panel. But I can read them out if you want. There were
Yes,
some
thank you.
comments in relation to. I believe this was made when Talent was speaking around how do we ensure that energy perspective is attendant as the critical enablers for internet governance. There was others that request Jane to expand further on alternative risk perspective, and then request around have best practice areas for this topic where those resources could be created. I can answer that one in the chat. And then maybe develop procedures or guidelines as highlighted by Dr. Emma. So those questions around Jane to expand on the risk perspective and maybe Talent touching upon the energy perspective around internet governance and as a critical enabler were the ones that appear in the chat so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Yes, so we can start with Jane, and then we can have Talent come in, and then Carlos, if you can finish up.
Absolutely. And I'll be very quick so we can fit in more people. I think what we'd have to say is we'd have to take a look at the traditional risk checklists and risk matrices that are generally used for investment, and look at how we would adapt them, and look at our own risk tolerance in the specific market or area we're talking about, and what the feasibility is of developing that infrastructure, building it out, the different regulatory and policy parameters in a country. And by reassessing risk, it's also taking a look at, there's some complications when people take a look at risk and look at a country and say, oh, well, I'm not sure we can actually do business here. Well, if we're talking about a different focus from a community-based perspective with the backing of different government organizations in the country, different communities of interest, the way you're going to look at the tolerance for risk, your checklist for risk, and whether it's a social investment risk model, which is different, you're going to have different factors that you would use from both governance, policy, regulatory, and then even from a more systemic financial perspective, where there's some very different models that are used for assessing risk. So this might be one of those topics that would be really great for another IGF or for to what one of the speakers has typed in the chat about what some of the best practices might be for assessing risk in a country, and how we can work and speak with donors at a different level to speak their language from an investment perspective, but reassess how that would work with local community involvement. So I'll stop there, but it's more a question of if there are traditional ways of assessing risk that are tied to grants and loans, and or how a government might look at a project coming into its country, or how local multi-stakeholder approach to building connectivity would be put together. We'd have to start to take apart those traditional models and rebuild a different type of risk framework. Over to you again.
Yes, thank you so much, Jane. Now I'll give it to Talat.
Thanks so much. I think it's a great question. Thank you for asking about the governance because it's a really good segue into the publication that I wanted to bring your attention to. It's called Policy Actions to Close the Gender Digital Divide. We are here today to speak about innovative financing mechanism for generally digital divide, and the organization where I'm working is now focusing on gender digital divide because it's a major topic globally. And this initiative is called Women in Digital Economy Fund, which was launched by USAID, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and other donors, and which started as a $50 million fund, now is growing to 80 million and more as more donors are joining, Microsoft, KOICA, Reliance Foundation. And this initiative is implemented by 3 organizations in a consortium, GDIP, where I'm working, also CARE International, and GSMA. This initiative identified 3 areas where there has to be a lot of work done. One is the financing, so there is funds set apart to support women-led organizations or organizations who are working on closing gender digital divide. Second area, I think it's the know-how, how to do this kind of work. So there is opportunity for technical assistance to organizations. And finally, third major area is policy and regulations. And there, myself and my colleague Wakas here, who is sitting here in this room as well, we are working with the governments on that are interested and willing to do reforms to close the gender digital divide. And in this publication we have collected interesting, promising practices from around the world, and this will be annual publication. And hopefully that next year we can see, Colombia case, Kenya case, that would enable other governments also to get inspired and to work on closing the gender digital divide. And finally, I just wanted to say there are 5 core areas where the work is being focused on. One is access and affordability. Second is the relevant digital tools and services. Third is digital skills and literacy. Fourth is safety and security online. And finally, as Jane was mentioning, the importance of data and insights, which is crucial for policymakers and regulators to make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Talant. Absolutely, we can't finish without talking about how we are mainstreaming gender in whilst talking around financing mechanism for this type of initiatives. And thanks for mentioning what WIDEF is doing. Now I'll just hand it back to the on-site participants. Let me see how many questions do we have in the room. So a couple of hands. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. This session was very comprehensive, but I need, please, I present myself. I'm Kosi Amesinu. I'm from Benin. I'm from Ministry of Economy and Finance, but I'm also leads one NGO called Women Be Free. We provide employment for training and employment for ladies and women in our country. When we talk about community network, is something very important for us. I want to know step by step what is the process to build a good community network where we don't have problem on how we can make it sustainable for a time. That is my first question. The second one is leading the ladies and women. How we can I put on table partnership directly SAF and SAF organization and to provide knowledge somewhere to another countries like mine in Benin? Can we make a partnership and provide knowledge directly to our different community? How can we do it now? Third one, the fund we are talking about, is it available for every region of the world, or is specifically for some region and from some kind of stakeholders specifically? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those 3 questions. I would give the mic to Carlos. Carlos, I've seen you have shared some of the links in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing those links. So you can come in, and then also we can hear from Lillian and Talent. You have something? Okay, go ahead. Sorry, we can't hear you, Carlos. Sorry, we still can't hear you. Just give me 1 minute, 1 second. Can you speak, Carlos, now? Let's hear. No. Yes, it's on our side. We're trying to figure out. Okay, as we can't hear Carlos in the room, so we are sorting that out with the technicians. But meanwhile, we can hear from Lillian and Talent, and then we'll get back to you, Carlos.
Well, I think the question about the sustainability is the big question, no? Because I think we in Colombia have a methodology when we try that the community appropriate the network since the first beginning of the process. Then it have a series of steps to create a group that sustain the operation, but also the uses of the community network. When there is a problem, can fix the network. Then I think that is one of the things that make that the network can sustain in the time. Not to have a group of people in the community that lead the operation of the community. I think that is so important. Try to find those persons that like the technology, but also like to serve their community, no? And try that they engage to the community network and sustain the operation of the community network. And then other part could be try to find a financial method to sustain the expenses of the community network, no? The way to sustain the connectivity, but try to be creative on that. Then sometimes people also make some, I don't know, festivals or things, no, that for them is easier to have the expenses, or in other communities they just put a contribution, an equal contribution to sustain the expenses of the community. Then it's different in each community. I don't know. Okay, I think it's okay for me.
Thank you so much, Talent. Briefly.
Thank you. In terms of building community networks, I think I could point out 2 organizations that are very strong at it. Is one Internet Society, and we have colleagues here, and I think there are guides for step-by-step guides on building community networks. And the other one is Association for Progressive Communications, APC, and Carlos I think could probably shared some links, so very good resources. And in our case in Kyrgyzstan, engaging the local community has been the biggest factor, that it has to be bottom-up interest and approach. And in terms of the fund, in your question, this fund is available for organizations around the world in the global south, but of course the most priority will be the areas where the gender divide is the biggest challenge.
Yes, and finally, I would like to say that it's important to exchange the experiences between communities. For us has been a key to have some encounters where people from different communities can know what is the experience of other communities, can exchange the problems, because for they said, okay, it makes me see that it's not just my problem, that maybe many of us have the same problem and many of us can find the solutions for some problems. Then the exchange of experiences, I think, is so important.
Thank you so much, Lilian. I don't know if we have 1 minute for Carlos. Carlos, you can come in now. Sorry. No, we can't still hear you. Yes. Unfortunately, Carlos, we can't hear you for now. And we can share some of the links as has been mentioned on the chat, and also by Talent. There's a lot of resources that have been produced by different organizations.
We can hear them Jane. So
Yeah, now it seems we can't hear them. They can't hear us online.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
we
so.
can hear you now.
That's
We
sad.
can hear you now.
are you gonna go to Seville, Jane?
I want to. I
Sorry,
hope I
we
can.
can hear you now. Can you hear me?
That conference is looking very interesting. Yeah. Okay, well, we should talk more.
Can you hear me?
There is a civil society mechanism that is engaging with the conference, and I've been
Really? Bravo.
Hello,
with it. And,
Carlos, can you hear me?
Bringing some of these inputs. So,
All right, I'll reach out to you. We can maybe just have a catch up.
Okay.
I think it's really important to reassess risk. I really do, because it's keeping so much investment locked
Sorry,
up.
we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Hello, IGF, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear?
Can you hear our private conversation here on the online?
Yeah, we need to have a separate workshop.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's sad. You know what they're doing? They're using different
Sorry,
frequencies
can you
in each
hear
of the
us?
rooms.
No.
Okay.
Oh, talk about tricky. They did this in Baku in 2012, and it's very it's good. They have an open ceiling. That's why it's hard to. So
Let me try and see if somebody.
But it looks like the session has ended. Anyway, I mean.
Oh, has it? Oh, yeah, you're right.
I mean, it was due to finish 2 minutes ago. So.
Let me try call somebody who's in the room to just advise us what's happening.
Sure,
good
thank
idea,
you.
Dr. Emlyn.
Okay. I think I'll just go ahead and wrap up the session. It's been great to hear our folks online. Great conversation there. But I really just want to extend my heartfelt gratitude for all our esteemed panelists and speakers for sharing their expertise and sharing their experiences and also insights.
For some reason, I was seeing the person in the room, but somehow
quite
the call is not
great. Special thanks
connecting.
to
I think we can just chat and say we're dropping off.
for APC for enabling on-site participation, and also for Riyadh for hosting this discussion and conversation. To our participants, thank you for engaging. Your questions, your reflection has been
great
quite
to hear you, Jen. Yeah, we'll connect again.
And your energy also
good
to
bye,
really
Carlos.
still have
Bye,
the
Dr. Emma. Thank you so
beyond
much.
the room.
Thank you. Bye.
And
everyone.
as we live here, let's keep on reimagining financing mechanisms for community-centered connectivities, and let's keep on sharing in our different spaces, and also challenge the traditional approaches as well as embracing innovation as we work together to build a digital future where no one is left behind. Once again, thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you along the corridors and engaging further. And have a great rest of the day and enriching IGF participation. All